Nikki, really quick, this is
Before we go to Andrea and Ryan have both said that if you guys have questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, raise your hand, interrupt. They're more than willing to stop their presentation and take care of some of those questions. So please feel free to do so. All right, Andrea, go for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Nikki. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. My name is Andrea Lund. I'm an epidemiologist in the Vector-Borne disease section at the California Department of Public Health, and I'm looking forward to giving you an overview of the epidemiology of a few of our important vector-borne diseases in California. Next slide. And just to orient you to the vector-borne disease section, we aim to protect the health and well-being of Californians from diseases transmitted to people from insects and other animals. And this work includes the prevention and surveillance, as well as control of a number of things, including mosquito-borne diseases, tick-borne diseases, plague, hantavirus, and flea-borne typhus. And I've highlighted mosquito-borne and tick-borne diseases today because those are what cause the highest burden of disease, most number of cases in California, and with an example, mosquito and tick here for your visual orientation. Next slide. And so here we have we have a number of mosquito-borne diseases in California, and they fall into two main groups. The first is West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis virus. These viruses are endemic in California and transmitted by these brown Culex mosquitoes, which are also endemic in California. That means they've been here and they continue to be here. The other group of mosquito-borne diseases include dengue, Zika, and chikungunya viruses. These viruses are typically associated with international travel to endemic areas. There's a lot of transmission of dengue virus in Latin America right now, for example. And these viruses are transmitted by Aedes mosquitoes. And so these are the small little black mosquitoes with white stripes on their legs. And they're invasive in California, so they're not from here. They've been introduced and have been spreading across the state, and they're in about 24 counties now. So even though they're mostly travel associated, the possibility of local transmission in California is there. But for the sake of time, I will focus on West Nile virus today. So next slide. And I'm focusing on West Nile virus because it causes the most disease on a yearly basis. West Nile virus infection is often asymptomatic, but it can cause illness that ranges from a mild febrile illness that you may just stay home for. You may not go to the doctor, but it can also be very severe and even fatal neuroinvasive disease. It was first detected in California in 2003 and has caused disease in people every year since. And as I mentioned earlier, this virus is transmitted by Culex mosquitoes, which are endemic to California and can be found in both rural and urban areas. West Nile virus primarily circulates between birds and mosquitoes. So you see on the left-hand side of that diagram, that's the main transmission cycle. So the virus is going between birds as the main host and then with mosquitoes as the vector. And then the virus can spill over into other populations, including mammals. People and horses are two common victims of this virus, but importantly, infections in mammals like people and horses are incidental. We don't develop enough virus in our bloodstreams for mosquitoes to get infected when they bite us. Yeah, next slide. And CDPH essentially has a monitoring program for each element of the transmission cycle that I just showed you. So my colleagues and I are take care of the human case surveillance component of this surveillance. So that's monitoring for human cases that get reported often through seeking healthcare and getting appropriate testing. And then that testing then gets forwarded on to local health departments. But then there's also significant environmental surveillance for West Nile virus across the state. Over 70 mosquito and vector control agencies are boots on the ground collecting and testing mosquitoes For West Nile virus, they're also reporting and testing dead birds, and some of them are also testing flocks of what are called sentinel chickens for virus. And we're sort of ramping up into mosquito season right now. We just reported our first case of West Nile virus a week or so ago, and that season will last through August into September and then start winding down from there. Next slide. And so this is a kind of a snapshot of where West Nile virus activity was reported last year in 2024. There are about 24 counties statewide that had human cases and an additional 8 counties that had environmental activity, so detections in mosquitoes or dead birds or sentinel chickens, but without human cases. And so that amounted to a total of 131 human cases, including 12 fatalities. Next slide. And you see in this, so this is a graph of the number of cases across time since West Nile was introduced from 2004 through last year. You'll see that the 131 cases that were reported last year is very much on the lower end. So it was a quiet year for West Nile virus. You'll also see that in the little text box there, almost 80% of our cases were what we call neuroinvasive. And so that's that severe form of disease. And those are the most likely cases to go seek healthcare. If you're really, really sick with neuroinvasive disease, you're likely to go to the doctor, even the hospital. And so we know and expect that those febrile cases, those more mild cases, are very underreported. We expect 30 to 70 fever cases for every neuroinvasive case. Therefore, the 28 cases that were reported are probably a vast underestimate, and there's probably 3,000 to 7,000 cases in 2024 that we didn't see or that weren't reported. Next slide. And the best way to prevent mosquito-borne diseases is to prevent mosquito bites in the first place. One important way of doing so is by protecting yourself personally from bites. You can do this by wearing long and loose-fitting clothing, especially at times when mosquitoes are out. So those brown Culex mosquitoes tend to bite at dawn and dusk, and so protecting your skin from those bites at those times will definitely minimize the amount of biting that happens. So we'll applying repellent to closed and exposed skin. And we have a number of resources on our website with guidance on the repellents that we recommend. Another way to prevent bites is to keep mosquitoes out of your home and yard, particularly by removing standing water that's important habitat for mosquito breeding. And the local vector control agencies that I mentioned earlier, who do a lot of that environmental surveillance, are funded through tax dollars and can provide these mosquito control services to residents at no charge. So if you live in one of those areas, I definitely recommend reaching out to your local vector control agency. And so next slide, please. And so here's a map of the areas that those vector control agencies serve. As I mentioned, there's about 70 of those agencies. They cover about 90% of the population in California, though just 45% of the state's areas. They're important counterparts to the local health departments who are doing that human case surveillance and providing the environmental response to human cases, as well as service requests for help controlling mosquitoes and vectors around your home. And most are also members of the Mosquito and Vector Control Association of California, which has some nice resources on their website, which I've linked here. Next slide. And so if you're interested in learning more, I can encourage you to visit our website, westnile.ca.gov, which has a lot of information on West Nile virus transmission, as well as reports and other educational resources. Next slide. Now I'll transition to tick-borne diseases. Ticks are small spider-like creatures, most often found in wooded or brushy areas with tall grass, rocks, logs, fallen leaves. They attach to hosts, often animals, sometimes people, and feed on their blood for up to several days. And in doing so, they can transmit pathogens. There are a couple dozen ticks. There are dozens of tick species in California, but few are known to bite people. And there are two main types that we're concerned about biting people. That's the exodid or hard ticks and the argicid or soft ticks. Today we'll primarily talk about two diseases transmitted by the hard tick Ixodes pacificus, which is pictured here. That's also known as the black-legged tick.
Andrea, there's a question in the chat. Were the rates California specific?
The rates in the West Nile virus cases?
Ryan, could you clarify for us?
Yeah, those were all cases that were reported in California.
Thank you.
Yep.
Andrea, this is Deanna. Going back to the West Nile, are there specific symptoms that we would be looking for at the tribal health clinics, like if someone's coming in?
Yeah, so I think the febrile illness is very non-specific. So it's just like flu-like symptoms. And then the neuroinvasive disease can present in a number of ways. And that can range from, like sort of an altered mental consciousness, or like kind of meningitis or encephalitis symptoms. Yeah, and I'd be happy to put together some resources or direct you to some resources on the clinical guidance for that. I believe there's some resources on our website for resources for healthcare providers regarding that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions before I continue with the ticks? Okay, so today we'll focus on Lyme disease, which is it's caused by the bacteria Borrelia burgdorferi, as well as anaplasmosis, which is caused by a different bacteria, which is a mouthful to say, Anaplasma phagocytophilum. These two diseases are endemic in California, and as I said, transmitted by those Western black-legged ticks, which you see here. And we see several other tick-borne diseases in California, but these are either emerging or re-emerging and occur in lower numbers than Lyme and anaplasmosis do. Next slide. And in general, ticks prefer cool, moist areas and can be found on wild grasses and low vegetation in both urban and rural areas. Some common habitats for hard ticks specifically include the coastal scrub you see on the left, the mixed forest in the middle, as well as there are certain species of hard ticks that are really well adapted to dogs and free-ranging in backyard dogs specifically. Western black-legged ticks have been found in 56 of the 58 counties in California, and they're particularly common on the north coast and on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada. Next slide. And adult ticks climb to the tips of vegetation along trails and wait for hosts to brush against them. And this is what you see in this picture here. And this is a behavior called questing. Nymphs, in contrast, they're smaller. You can sort of see the size comparison of the tick's adult. Below that picture, you see adult females, adult males, and nymphs. And so those nymphs they basically look like poppy seeds with legs. And they're found in moist areas that are closer to the ground, often on rocks, logs, or in leaf litter. And these two stages of ticks also differ in their seasonality. Adult Western black-legged ticks are most active from the fall through the early spring, while the nymphs are usually active in the spring and early summer months. Next slide. And here's a diagram of what the transmission of Lyme disease looks like. As I mentioned, it's caused by the bacteria Borrelia burgdorferi, and it can spread to people through the bite of infected Ixodes pacificus ticks. And so starting in the top left, you have tick larvae and nymphs that may become infected when they feed on wild rodents that are infected with Borrelia burgdorferi. And once infected, that tick will remain infected through subsequent life stages and may transmit the bacteria to subsequent hosts that it feeds on, including people. And so you see here this infected nymphal tick. Sorry, I don't have a cursor, but that first infected nymphal tick may go on to bite someone who is sitting on a rock on the side of a trail somewhere. So those nymphs are, in areas that are closer to the ground. And that may be one way a person can get infected with Borrelia burgdorferi, or that infected nymph may progress on to become an infected adult tick, and then they would then engage in that questing behavior where they're climbing to the top of grasses and waiting for someone to walk by and brush up against them. Then they sort of attach and then find a nice warm place for to cozy up and drink some blood. An infected tick must be attached to a person for at least 24 hours before it can transmit that Lyme disease, the Borrelia burgdorferi bacteria that causes Lyme disease. So that makes the tick checks after being in an area with ticks super important preventive measure for actually getting the disease. Lyme disease clinically may start as a mild illness that could be mistaken for the flu, and then the infection can be treated with antibiotics. Of note, in California, when an infected, actually, can you tick to the next slide, please? When an infected tick feeds on a Western fence lizard, a substance in the lizard's blood actually kills the bacteria in that tick. So then that would make that tick uninfected in its next life stage. So that's sort of a fun fact about, an interesting element of the ecology of California where that keeps our risk relatively low compared to other parts of the US. Next slide. And so here are Lyme disease cases in California by year over the last approximately 10 years. We see about 100 cases per year, more or less. And oftentimes those cases have some sort of travel to other parts of the country. There's much more Lyme disease in the Northeast US and the Midwestern states compared to California. So oftentimes people will return home with Lyme disease that they did not acquire here. Next slide. But despite that, we do have Lyme disease in California, and you can see this is a map of the incidence, so reported cases per 100,000 person years, and the places that light up in the sort of darker colors are the places where we tend to find the most Ixodes pacificus ticks. And so that's kind of the northern coastal counties, particularly Mendocino and Humboldt, but all the way down to Santa Cruz, as well as in the Western Sierra counties. And Sierra County had one of the top 4 in terms of the 10-year incidence. Next slide. Now I'll talk just a little bit more briefly about anaplasmosis. This is an infection caused by the bacteria Anaplasma phagocytophilum, which infects the host's granulocytes, or which is a type of white blood cell. And similar to Lyme, the bacteria is also transmitted by Ixodes pacificus, which can become infected when they bite an infected wild rodent. So similar life transmission cycle. A person infected with Anaplasma phagocytophilum may have no symptoms, or they may develop a nonspecific flu-like illness. And that illness can be more severe in elderly people and those with weakened immune systems, but the disease is rarely fatal. Next slide, please. And over the last 20 years, cases of anaplasmosis have shifted from a pattern of emergence, so kind of, in the early 2000s, ticking around with, a case or 2 a year, to becoming endemic, properly endemic in California. And so we see an average of 6 cases reported each year, though this has ranged widely from a single case to over 20. Like Lyme, half or more of these reported cases have out-of-state exposure in the Northeast or the Midwest, where the incidence is much higher. While travel remains an important risk factor, we do see hotspots of local transmission in counties along the North Coast specifically. And in 2024, local exposure was reported in both Marin and Sonoma counties. And interestingly, we have seen 2 reports of co-infection with Borrelia burgdorferi and Anaplasma phagocytophilum that were likely acquired in California. So that's more of a tidbit, not something that will be super common. Next slide. As with mosquitoes, the best way to avoid getting tick-borne diseases like Lyme and anaplasmosis is to prevent tick bites in the first place. And we have some great resources on our vector-borne disease website, which are screenshotted and linked in the slide here. A great first step for preventing tick bites is to know where and when you might encounter ticks when you're outside. And when you know you'll be in an area where ticks are common, one of the best things you can do is use tick repellent. So many repellents that work for mosquitoes also work for ticks, and this is often apparent on the product's label. Wearing light-colored and protective clothing also helps us to see ticks while we're out, and allows us to, you can brush them off when you see them before they get too far. And after returning home from an area where ticks are common, check your body for ticks. They like to find warm places to kind of settle in for their blood meal, and you can any that you find you can remove with very fine tipped tweezers that you see here. And we also have some animations and resources for removing ticks that you find on our website. And so next slide, I think that is it, and I'd be happy to take any more questions that people have. Thank you.
It looks like there's one question in the chat. This is a big year for MODOC.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't know how much we have public health biologists that go out to different parts of the state and do tick surveillance, and I'm not sure how much how often our biologists are getting, each biologist is assigned a number of counties. I'd be curious to hear if
yeah, we're super rural, like frontier rural, but I heard somebody call it a tick bloom this year because it's just I've never pulled a tick off of myself or kids. Up where we live, we're in the Warner Mountains, and the elevation's pretty high and it snows, so they don't survive really well out here. But this year our cats have had ticks. In town at the base of the valley is just everybody's having dogs, pets, people. So yeah, I'm curious about it. We've had a couple people come in with having done yard work or fire abatement and have had tick bites and some weird symptoms. So I'm curious if that has something to do with it.
Yeah.
All right, off we go to our next talk. Thank you very much, Andrea, for your presentation. And Ryan, the stage is yours.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I am Ryan Seeley, and I do work at the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. I work as an environmental health scientist. That just means a lot of different things. Very fancy name, but well water testing. And I'm actually in Port Gamble Squalalum tribe right now doing their yearly tribal inspections, things like that. And I do look for things like this, the standing water and stuff too, especially when I'm inspecting schools. And so my perspective obviously is going to be more kind of community driven and just what I hear a lot about. I've done a lot of work with traditional ecological knowledge, so I'm going to kind of incorporate some of that, just what I've heard from some elders. I've interviewed about 50 elders across several different tribes from Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. So just kind of put that in there. Next slide. So what we do know is that changing climates, we're having all these shifting patterns, the longer, hotter seasons. And what we know right now, like with these changing seasons, especially in California, right, the snowpack is shrinking and the spring melt is happening weeks earlier, frosts are shorter. And so this is like letting the bugs live a lot longer into the year. They're not having the freeze and die off that we would typically see from the colder weather. And we've seen obviously some very extreme weathers, especially in California. I mean, there's been floodings, there's been fires, And even with the floodings, we're having waters are accumulating in different places, especially where flooding. And I think about, like, my heart goes out right now, what's happening in Texas and all the lives that have been lost where these flash floods are just so quick and so can just alter your life in moments, right? And so just thinking about from a public health perspective, um, educating community about being safe and all those sort of things. And so we do have a lot of these vectors, right? They're starting to breed like in new places, and it's due to a lot of these shifting patterns. Um, and so the range is shifting as well. We used to hear a lot about especially for like the tick Lyme disease, everybody thought it was on the East Coast, but it's not. It's starting to migrate this way. And it's just becoming more common. And I do want to mention though, because I've done a presentation on this before, but it's more of an epidemiology side and some of that research. And I think that anybody else here who would know, but one thing is it's more common to do testing right now. I think there still is a lot of under testing, but compared to back in the day, right, there's a lot of different ways now to do testing for these vector-borne illnesses and many common ways. But we do still know that with our tribes, especially they probably, I'm guessing that's not like a top priority resource that they might have in the clinic. And so just thinking about that could be also part of seeing increased cases. We're getting a little bit better in the science of that. So with this, all these like weather changes, we do have this cultural overlap, right? So we're having these changes are falling right into like timing seasons and places for traditional like gatherings, hunting, fishing, and food harvesting, where in the spring, obviously there's more water. The summer, later summers, people might be collecting berries or whatnot. It's going to be hotter and drier. People will be out probably getting, I'm guessing, more ticks. So I'm guessing seasonal is going to be play a big part of this too. Next slide. So this is actually, it looks like just a colorful picture, but you can see it's related to temperature starting in the 70s. You can see California, okay, 3 degrees has warmed since the 1970s, but they have been steadily increasing, especially mostly since the 1990s. So higher annual temperatures are obviously contributing to these longer warm seasons affecting the ecosystem and the vector activity and water storage. And we do know in the Central Valley and the interior regions, they're warming faster, especially in the summer months. So it kind of that aligns with that higher mosquito maybe activity and even fire risk, right? It's all just kind of part of this circle. And so again, the snow melts and more extreme weather patterns, they do affect the tribal land use and outdoor cultural practices. And one way we could like monitoring, which I'm sure there's a lot of monitoring going on, but especially for like local people, just thinking about monitoring temperatures and what we're seeing in those trends might, help us understand a little bit better and to maybe be predictive of when these things will be showing up. And I think it's just like foundational in that disease prevention. Next slide. So I knew I put recap, I figured because she was going to go over all of this already. So we'll just kind of skip this slide. But I did put on here, try to do like the red dots of things that were more concerning. And then that like Western dog tick, not, it's a concern, but not as much of a concern as the others. Next slide. So why does this matter? Obviously, health, culture, and climate. It matters because cultural practices and mental health, they're deeply connected. Being outdoors, gathering, even gardening, fishing, it's not just about food or ceremony, but these are like healing practices that promote wellness, like well-being, identity, and relational balance for many tribal communities. And so the fear of maybe vector-borne illnesses of what people hear, or if they see somebody who might get something, it's definitely going to affect access to cultural spaces, especially for probably elders and little children. So people might want to limit how much time they are spending outdoors. And so the climate really puts this pressure, I feel like, on both ecosystems and the mental health. Land-based engagements, they improve that mental health. And so Dr. Kyle Hill, he explains that the indigenous eco-relational engagement of gathering, foraging, and storytelling and spending time outdoors, it has been proven to improve the mental wellness. And I've got to work with Dr. Kyle Hill, and he is great. This is like his whole entire work. And if you're ever interested in that, I would definitely reach out to him. Next slide. So this graph, my line's got a little bit messed up here, but as you can see, each one is supposed to. Here's some different areas, right, where we know traditional activities might be happening. Riverbanks, the oak wetland, Bushy Meadow, the riparian corridor, tall grasses and forests, and the community garden. So you can see, right, when we're just growing food in the community garden, that's definitely going to be like pretty low risk. There's still going to be critters in there, but because it is such a maintained space, that is going to be the lowest risk. And then you can see, yeah, being right next to the water, maybe acorn gathering for ceremonies, those are going to be high risk levels. Next slide. So this is just kind of the pictures I put together. Some are my pictures. You can see there's some shell beds there, berry collecting, stuff from fishing, some Devil's Club I actually collected just like a few weeks ago, and then some traditional food sources from California. And just thinking about there's just so many different spaces that people are navigating when it comes to this. And even the shell beds, right? We're seeing this increase of a lot of when we have these like algae blooms and stuff. And it's incredible. So actually where I am right now, last year they had built a new their fish hatchery, and it was where there's this big contaminated space where they were doing like well, there's like a bunch of creosote logs down there, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. They used to mill wood down there. The tribe cleaned it up. I mean, millions of dollars went into this project, but it's pretty cool. So this used to be in a custom place. It's right on the water, like in a bay, where they used to collect shellfish for food. And so they had to stop because it was so contaminated. And it's funny dreaming about Devil's Club right now. They put in this warning system. It's amazing. So you drive down the hill, they have this big fishery, and they put this big window. And the community knows when the light now is green, it's safe to collect shellfish. And then when they have the light red, they know that it's not safe because of the algae blooms or whatever. So the water is being tested on the regular to keep communities safe who are going back to these ways of collecting food from these traditional spaces. So it's just really great what people are doing, warning systems, whether it is like algae blooms or toxins or bugs. I mean, I think we can be so creative, right? Next slide. So this is a lot of the work I've done, I feel like related is the traditional ecological knowledge and elders. And there was very few folks, but I did also interview folks who worked in natural resources who really have a lot to tell, right? Like fisheries and forestry work as well. But I really would recommend you check in with them because they are like experts and they have so much important information that you wouldn't think of or know, right? They've lived this lifetime, and especially if they've lived in the same area. This was the first time I heard several different elders across several different tribes kept talking about ticks and mosquitoes and other little critters. And they said it's so weird. We never saw this many of like those type of bugs until the recent years. And they had contributed to, like they said, the snow packs, not just how deep the snow was, but how long the snow was around. So, with that changing, they're saying like, yeah, we're seeing so many more bugs and even shifts in seasons where it's so warm now that even people are hunting deer and elk like maybe a month later because it's just too warm to even have these critters hanging in trees, right, for a day or two to drain and even process in fields because it's just too warm. So it's not safe. We heard just a lot about even like seeing animals migrating. Like over in Idaho, they're having pelicans. In the last like 7 years, pelicans have all of a sudden started migrating. They had never seen pelicans. And so I just encourage people to talk to your elders and see, because they might also know things that would be really beneficial, maybe things that they knew, or stories of things to protect themselves from these vectors, right? I mean, even then they had some, and they are going to have some stories and information. So it's just always interesting, especially for each area, to hear what these elders have to say. And these two ladies right here, they were actually speaking at a drought conference, and that's Dr. Melody Wynn. She works with Spokane Tribal Network. She has a food sovereignty garden there. And then, oh, the other woman, I can't remember her name right now, but she worked in the water for NESPERS. She did water, checking like water quality and all that for many, many, many years. And they just had so much experience to offer to the people who wanted them to speak at a drought conference. And it was interesting because there was very specific questions that this group wanted to ask these women. But courageously, Dr. Melody Wynn, I just love her. She was the first one to speak, and they said, "Well, here's the questions." And she said, "Absolutely not." She said, "I've been sitting here and listening to you for 2 days about you, your expertise, and this and that." She says, "I have notes, and it's my turn to talk. And I'm going to tell you what we're experiencing and what I want to talk about based on things that you've missed." So I just love that. These elders, they're just, willing to put themselves out there and speak truth and focus on things that are important to us. So next slide. So we already heard a lot of this too, like what you can do, right? Wear the long sleeves, repellent, check yourself, the kids and the pets, dump a lot of the standing water. Like I said, talk to elders, share stories. This picture here of this tub of water was actually on one of my inspections, and it was at right outside of the cultural building. And it's so funny. Sometimes you just think of things, you don't think of things. And this, it's in an area with a lot of rain. And I was thinking like, oh yeah, there'd be a lot of mosquitoes and this and that. This water shouldn't be standing here. And when I had mentioned to them, you need to get rid of this water because it's gonna collect little critters. And they were like, oh yeah, it's also a drowning hazard. I'm like, oh, well, you're right. This is the cultural building and there's kids, there's a playground here. So always just checking perimeters for safety, I think, is always great. Here I actually have a picture of one of my favorite plants, and there's many different kinds, and it's the agastache. I call it my tea garden. I have probably 12 different varieties. It's very aromatic. They also can call it hummingbird mint or Mexican mint, and it likes really hot climates, and the pollinators love it. So they are natives to North America, I think a little bit further south, but thinking about from the tribal perspective, what would people want to do if they don't want to spray? The next slide. So here my picture got messed up. You can see this peppermint and the fresh French marigold. They didn't quite come through, but just think about reducing risk without disrupting your culture, things that you can do naturally. Planting some of these plants specifically like around the house. We did hear keeping tweezers in a first aid kit, using some cedar and sage. I guess smoke can repel. I know I do have some of this rose geranium, and I have one on my patio, and it is very aromatic, very citrusy. So just thinking about things like that not only are you helping the pollinators, right, but you're also helping keep other things away. Sweet basil. There was several other, you guys, catnip, and then there was peppermint. If you've ever planted peppermint in the ground, you know it's not exactly the best idea unless that's what you want. But some of these things just repel really, really good things, and the citronellas are just incredible. So with this, I did not put on here. I was thinking about, and maybe Dr. Lund can tell us what she thinks about this, but I was thinking like, I just bought a bat box at my farmer's market last weekend. And I was thinking because they eat all the mosquitoes. In my area, when I go on a walk and it's kind of in a swampy, marshy area, as soon as the sun goes down and you're out there, the mosquitoes, as they're saying, when the sun starts setting, there's billions of them. And then the bats, when it gets a little bit darker, even then, the bats just come out. They've been so close to me, and it's a little terrifying when there's just all around you. But I think that having the bats, thinking about that, putting in bat boxes in your area and bringing those back to help eat some of those critters would be really beneficial. So I don't know anything about the habitats or if bringing in bats, like whatever the rates are, people getting rabies or anything like that. You don't hear much about it. I'm sure it exists, but I'm guessing that the risk of the tick and um, the mosquito vector stuff is just probably a lot stronger, right? We have more rates of that than the other. So let's go to the next slide. So here was just like, there's not many people on, but I just had like a little bug battle quiz. And then, so question one was, which of these can turn into a mosquito nursery? Tire swing, a plant saucer, a rain barrel, or all of the above? This one, the answer is all of the above because you can collect the stagnant water where mosquitoes lay. But I did want to mention here though, because a lot of people do need to have rain barrels to collect rain. It's so important. We know water is becoming a really rare resource, but I think I know sometimes people will add a little bit of like bleach water um, to even, make it so it doesn't like collect slime or the mold. I do think collecting water is important, but maybe having like a better straining system on there. Question two, can you collect the rain barrel without creating mosquito risk? So you can see the answers there. And it says yes, if it's screened or sealed properly. So that was kind of a trick question, right? You can cover it with a very tight screen to block those mosquitoes. And then the third one, what's a good plant you can grow near your home to help the ticks and mosquitoes away? And the answer here is all of these. And there's probably so many other plants that are in the community specifically that we just don't know, right? This is just like a very common overlay. But like I said, again, talking with your elders and stuff, they might have some really good insights on that. And sometimes this doesn't work. Sometimes you just need the DEET. You need those things, right? You gotta check your hair and do all the things. But I think every little bit helps, and especially when we're trying to kind of um, not be resilient to climate change, but really start thinking about mitigation, right? I mean, just being resilient, I just don't even really care for that word. That's just saying we're gonna continue dealing with what's coming with our way instead of doing the work, I think, to like mitigate some of these issues. So, and I think that is my last slide. Oh, thoughts, discussion.
Ryan, there's some questions in,
Oh,
let's see. So Jessica has bat houses, so she looks to be
yeah.
our bat expert. Um, Andrea said many vector controlled agencies also have mosquito fish programs.
Hmm.
So maybe that exists in the area or maybe in different tribal
Yes.
areas.
Yeah, and I think all those things are so great for looking into. I think all of it helps. I do know with the bat boxes too, you do need to be very particular to get certain sizes for your area because if you get some that are too big, they can't nest in there. The one that I just bought was way smaller than I thought, and sometimes it takes bats like 3 years to even come into the little houses. So you got to be like patient with these things, right? This isn't the cure all, spray the chemical, okay, we're done. It's more of like a really like long-term helper, right? But I mean, all these there's so much information and resources out there. I just think it's really important though for our tribal communities who have already dealt with so much contaminations and toxicities of being near like Superfund sites that discussing these things is I think how we're gonna like even bring up the issues and get them interested, right? Is kind of like doing some of that natural stuff. Like I said, that's not always the answer for everything, but it opens the door for people getting interested and trying something new. And at the same time, you get to educate them about all the other things. So like that's kind of where I'm like, okay, what's the damage control? So
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to turn off your mic or turn on your mic, I suppose. I think it's okay to shut off the recording too, Brig. I think we're good.